Number one, no two concussion patients are the same. No two concussions are the same. So even one person that's had more than one concussion, every concussion is its own entity. And you have to step back and really look at it, start from scratch. History is important, but what's going on now?
You're listening to Catalyst Talks, conversations with change agents, outliers, superheroes, and truly conscious leaders modeling what it is to be an unstoppable force for good and truth in this world. What lit these catalysts on fire to do their work, and what nuggets of wisdom can they share with a world literally on fire? I'm your host, Stephanie Trager. I'm a transformational catalyst and life coach to maverick change agents in business, leadership, and life. On this podcast, I wear an eclectic mix of hats, including Earthkeeper, Wayfinder, Truth Teller, coach, lawyer, business, and impact strategist. My intention is holding space for higher purpose, peak wellness, soul mastery, and deeper impact so we can live in harmony with ourselves, each other, and nature. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. If you love it, please share and spread the word. We're on YouTube and all the podcast platforms. See the show notes on catalysttalks.com for links, and enjoy this episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Catalyst Talks podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Brian Shannon, a true gift in my life, someone who's made a humongous impact in my life, and I'm really, really excited to share him, his story, his expertise with you. If you or anyone you know have experienced a concussion or other neurological conditions, I really invite you to not only listen, but share this episode. There's going to be a lot of information and useful anecdotes dropped here for you today. So a brief introduction before we get going and dive all the way in. Dr. Brian Shannon is a distinguished chiropractic neurologist, which I didn't even know existed after having about 8 massive concussions. And I will share the gift of how I came to know not only Dr. Shannon, but his work. And along with being a chiropractic neurologist, he has over 3 decades of experience revolutionizing the field of wellness. And as the founder and CEO of Total Body Rehabilitation, Dr. Shannon has dedicated his career to advancing the integration of cutting-edge techniques and technologies, plus comprehensive chiropractic and neurological care, making him a sought-after expert and speaker in the field and a teacher. And under his leadership, Total Body Wellness has become a beacon of hope, and I can vouch for that, for individuals seeking relief from concussions and other neurological situations, and has attracted clients and high-profile patients from all around the country. So with that, I want to get started first by saying hello, Brian. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Steph. Thanks for having me.
So before we drop into the anatomy of a concussion and all of the techniques and practices and ways that we can inspire hope in people, I'd love to ask you some questions about how you came to become a chiropractor.
Sure.
And then what led into chiropractic neurology, which I don't think a lot of people really know about.
It wasn't the initial plan. I don't think. I can remember as a young boy looking at an encyclopedia back in the days when we actually used books, and it had one of those transparent overlays of like human anatomy. And I remember opening it up to the nervous system, and I was probably in middle school, and I was looking at this picture of the nervous system, and I was just amazed by it. And I had no idea really what it was about, but something about, I just thought it was the neatest thing, how everything was connected. And I just knew somehow, some way I was going to be part of that sometime in my life. That was going to be my purpose. And I don't know if I really knew that in the detail I just expressed it, but my background in martial arts years ago, I had an injury. My martial arts instructor was a chiropractor, so that introduced me to chiropractic. I went through chiropractic school, loved it, met a chiropractic neurologist in the late 80s, and from that point on, it's just been this constant learning and evolving in the world of neurology. I love it. It's fascinating, and it's ever changing. We're constantly learning more about neurology and the brain in particular.
What I've learned in many years of having concussions, some people who've been listening to this podcast know I've done a few episodes on post-concussion syndrome and things that I've experienced. And I've met so many people who are dealing with concussions. And I know the breadth of your work in neurology expands beyond concussions, though. When I first met you, I didn't really know that anyone had the ability to address all of the different systems and the complexity of what a concussion actually is. And so I'd love for you to just drop into that a little bit. What is a concussion?
So I try to keep it simple here, but the reality of it is when the brain is insulted by a force, that force goes through the body. It can be your head, it could be your neck, it could be, it could be a sound wave like in a blast in a war situation. But the brain sustains a mild traumatic injury, and it's metabolic, it's physiologic, and it's microstructural, and those are important things to understand. So when we say metabolic, once your brain has an insult, it goes through a process of inflammation, and then it tries to repair itself. There are many things that can affect that process. Many things can get in the way of that process, and the thing that makes it a little challenging, at least historically, is that because it's a microstructural injury, once you've ruled out red flags like bleeds and more emergent things like that, you don't see it on your typical MRI or CAT scan or even your X-ray. So the brain looks fine, but the brain's not functioning fine. And that's where I think one of the things that led me to this particular passion at this point in time was watching people like yourself. You have questions, you don't understand. And people don't understand when you're suffering and people can't process things. They don't understand if they can't see it. We can understand a broken leg. You can look at an X-ray, there's a fracture, there's a cast, there's a healing time. It starts, it ends, you rehab, you're done. With this, because there's multiple systems or multiple circuits, if you will, that are involved, this can go on for years. Sometimes they resolve quickly, but oftentimes, and what I'm attracting in my practice now are those people who have had one concussion a long time ago, multiple concussions, or maybe they've had a concussion and they don't even realize they had a concussion because there's some myths tied into that as well. So, that's where I'm at now. I mean, this is about really evolving this space and trying to serve people at a different level, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I would love to double click on there. One of them was the myths of concussions. So let's just start. Yeah, what are some of the myths?
I mean, back in the day, back in the 90s and the early 2000s, I did a lot of work with football players.
Yeah.
And back in those days, there was a whole different protocol, if you will, or lack thereof. And things like rest is best. If you really had a good concussion, you were told to go rest, turn the lights out, and just wait till the recovery occurs. While rest is important in the initial phase of a concussion, it can actually make things worse, especially if you just seclude yourself in a dark room for prolonged periods of time. That can slow the process down and actually make things more challenging. So the whole dark room thing, it's not necessarily a good thing long term. Just waiting and it'll heal. It takes time. While healing does take time, the concept of waiting prolonged periods of time actually works against the recovery in many instances. So it's been shown that sub-irritating or sub-maximal aerobic exercise is beneficial in helping with that recovery. But there's a whole way of figuring out what's best and how much. And we've had this discussion many times about not overdoing it. So, you have to calculate and figure out what a person can handle, and you can get them back up and running in that way. And the whole concept of waking someone every 2 hours, while it's important the first 4 to 8 hours to make sure there's no dangerous, emergency type things going on, that whole concept that's been debunked as well. So those are the main myths that I see associated with this.
When I had my first big concussion, I had already had a bunch of other little ones, and it's often that way. You just become more susceptible, and like there's a compound effect or something. And I had a concussion, for listeners who don't know this, lasted about 2.5 years. And Like I thought I became the expert at how to heal from this. And over the many years, some weird force of nature pushed me back onto a snowboard, and I had a snowboarding accident a year and a half ago now. And that was really challenging because I couldn't find the help. I was making my own way. And I think that this is a lot of things. We're hearing, you go to say a chiropractor and they give you advice. You just listen, you kind of listen to who you trust.
Mhm.
And I was at a point where I was accepting the situation that, okay, my cognitive abilities are just not going to ever get better. And I might just always have a stutter. Hence, that's why we paused the podcast last year.
Mhm.
And, I was really starting to accept that this is going to be just it. And then I realized that I've been doing yoga next to a chiropractic neurologist for 6 years. And I somehow, divine intervention led me to find that out. And so I started working with you, Dr. Shannon. I'd love for you, interchanging Dr. Shannon and Brian. I'd love for you to share with people, when I first came to you, let's just kind of use me as an example. And then I want to share and have you teach us more about this, because the pieces that
Sure.
I started learning from you were real game changers. And now I see a lot of people suffering, and I want them to know the possibilities that exist.
So and I feel so grateful because it's funny how many times were we in that yoga studio together, and I don't know if we've even said two words to one another over the
Mhm.
course of time. I'm kind of get in, do my thing, and get on my way. But to your point, the one thing I hope that we can achieve here today, with all the things we'll talk about, is I want people to understand that there still may be hope.
Yeah.
Because when you came and we started talking out in the parking lot that day, I remember, hearing things in our conversation that sounded so familiar, and it's really, I'm sensitive to it. I'm very passionate about it, and it's very upsetting too, because people think, well, is this as good as it gets? I guess this is the way it's going to be. And sometimes that's not the case. You just have to find the right type of practitioner, a person that can, number one, listen to what's going on. I mean, how many times have I said to you, you say X and I say, what does that mean? And you give me the look. But it's like, I know every time you say something and I ask that same question, really understanding and being able to dive into what are the driving forces, because a couple things are for sure. Number one, no two concussion patients are the same.
Mm.
No two concussions are the same. So even one person that's had more than one concussion, every concussion is its own entity. And you have to step back and really look at it, start from scratch. History is important, but what's going on now?
Mhm.
So those are some of the things that that I gleaned just from our conversation. And then when we first started working together, and I won't get into any specifics, but there were some frustrations and challenges. And one of my challenges working with you was simply because you went through the school of hard knocks. You had these injuries. You figured a lot of things out. You educated yourself. You're very driven. You're very disciplined. You're very much, health is a huge priority for you. And trying to educate you and saying, okay, this is true, but it's a different concussion, because we always want to compare
Mhm.
to yesterday's event. And I do the same thing. I've had multiple concussions myself, and I have to remind myself. So going through that process of understanding, really looking at where you were at, what was going on at that time, and then working through the process. And that's what makes it kind of exciting. But the
Mhm.
biggest thing is people should really understand that there may be something more they can do to help themselves, for sure.
Mm. One of the things that I've been learning and fascinated by, and if anyone's been listening to this podcast and knows me, it's always, what is the inner work, also what is the emotional, spiritual component going on with experience we're attracting in our life, and the healing, and part of what really was the anatomy of this journey. It involved how you'd always bring to my attention the different systems, right? The skeletal system, the neurological system, the nervous system, the ocular, the vestibular. So maybe you could take us on a journey through the different systems, which each receive their own trauma and almost like need to be decoupled and untangled in their own.
You're saying it very eloquently. I mean, there are different what we call phenotypes or subcategories within a concussion. So when I see a person with a concussion, I think of things like, okay, what's going on with their cognition? How are they processing? How are they speaking to me and answering questions? How's their balance? What are they saying? Do I feel dizzy, or how's their spatial awareness? Very important. Of course, the skeletal system, the neck and the musculoskeletal components, very important as well. There's always some kind of physical aspect there. Um, Also hormonal. Is it a male? Is it a female? There's so many different things you can dive into in the endocrinology of things and the lab work and so forth, and where are they at in the inflammatory process? Is it chronic? Is it acute? So there's a lot of different things we have to see. So really the art of listening and guiding, and a lot of the paperwork that we interact with people on helps me categorize and get a feel. For example, I have somebody coming in who's had 8 concussions after we're done with this podcast. She's coming into the state to get a consult with me. And boy, oh boy, I've already got my thought process lined up, but I can't go in thinking I really know what's going on. I have to see, listen, and work through that process. So it's a matter of really looking at all these different things separately and how do they affect each other. And the answer and the solution to helping people is finding out which one of these systems is dominant, what is strong, what's still working. We can use this system that's working pretty well to help this system over here that's lagging behind. And that's the thing about functional neurology that I like. It uses the different components because it's a multifaceted approach to helping people.
And one of the things that I have found so helpful is the variety of tools that you use. So as you're speaking, you're saying you ask questions, you listen, and then you also have all of these tools that you integrate into that process. And you
Yes.
always have something you're whipping out, whether it's some frequency technology or lasers or even like a popsicle stick with a dot on it. Like you just,
Yeah.
so talk to us about some of your favorite,
Oh boy.
yeah, your favorite.
My favorite stuff. Well, there's a lot of favorites. We'll start with the popsicle stick. I mean, something is simple because not everything has to be high tech. One of the things that I love about technology is that it's there to back up what I see and I glean from the history and the exam. I always like to start there first. What do I see? And then I like to confirm because, my eyes are imperfect. I can't pick up every little detail that I might see with somebody else's ocular movement. So when we have the technology to track these things, we can see what I may or may not already know, or it can confirm or guide me. But I like to use those technologies. So there's technologies that we use for ocular testing to see how someone's moving to targets, whether they're pursuing something slowly or they're jumping to a target, or maybe how is somebody fixating on a target. Oftentimes when we have a concussion situation, people have difficulties with driving or being in light places or with a lot of background activity. It's too much stimulation. So these are all clues as to what we can use. And again, the technology verifies that. Big into balance technology. I like to record and see not just whether you have good or challenged balance, but what is your sway pattern? What's going on with the balance? Eyes open, eyes closed, firm surface. There's different ways that we can pull and glean information from that. Using VOG goggles for seeing what's happening with the eyes and head rotation. So all these different technologies pulled together for diagnostic purposes, and then some of them even can be used for therapeutic. And once you have an understanding of how you want to approach a patient's problem, you can use all kinds, whether it's laser therapy that we have here, we have vibrational therapy, we have radio frequency technologies, pulse electromagnetic frequency. I mean, there's just so many different things that we do have here. And we can use each one of those technologies very differently on different people. So that's where the art of it comes in.
Yeah. And for people who don't know what functional neurology is, could you give us a definition?
Yeah. So functional neurology is something that I believe was originated and developed in the chiropractic profession. So we have medical neurologists. I happen to work with one here in my area. We've been working together for 30 years. When someone has, medical needs, they see Dr. Mike, and he'll send people here when they need to be looked at a little differently. And functional neurology really encompasses using the receptors in different parts of the nervous system to create what's called neuroplasticity. And that's the ability for the brain to grow, develop, and become more efficient through stimulation. And that's pretty much what functional neurology is. It's a natural way of addressing dysfunctional neurological problems. I hate to say conditions and diagnoses because really, no matter what someone has, I'm not treating a condition. If someone comes in with Parkinson's, I'm looking at that person and saying, okay, there's a movement problem here. Where is the problem? Where's the longitudinal level of where that dysfunction is? And how can I best help that person optimize their neurological well-being?
I think one of the things that has been so tremendously helpful, especially when, if anyone is experienced or is experiencing a concussion, and I don't know, I do not like the word syndrome. So I'll just say like long-lasting post-concussion, but it's still a concussion, so it's not post. Anyway, you get it. So if anyone's experiencing that, we know it's a very dark place in your mind, right? Like it's not like your leg hurts. That sucks. Though when it's your head, it's everything, and your mind and your cognition. One of the also helpful components has been the coaching, the calls, the regular checking in. How are you? If I'm like, it hurts, what'd you do? What were you doing before that? Like those fine-tuned questions that you were building, just, really knowing me and knowing what I was doing. Because if you're coming in a few times a week or once a week, there's a lot of time in between to re-injure yourself, to be like in a, sitting with the wrong posture or eating the wrong foods or forgetting to do the little dot test. So what inspires you to integrate that into the practice?
I think it's simply an obsession. I mean, I really want, if I accept somebody into my practice, if I accept someone as a patient, we have to have certain understandings. Number one, you may never be perfect. That's okay, but you can be better. And if you can be better, and I lay out a plan and we come to an agreement that, okay, this is the plan. It may change, but we're going to work this process. I will give 100%. I ask everybody to do the same in return because it really becomes a relationship. This is not cookie cutter, I mean, the standard of care today, I have lots of challenges with, and I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole because there's a lot of great work out there. But to your point, checking in and seeing where somebody's at, it's sort of an intuitive thing. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how many times, we'll do something, and my goal is to always keep it right under that threshold of pushing you too far once I get to know you a little bit. But I'm going to check in if I think we might have gone too far, because you know what? It happens, and you need to know that, number one, it's okay. And number two, here's what you need to do to get yourself back on track. Or you may do something like spend too much time doing podcasts or spend too much time on a computer. Like, these are negotiable things that we tried to work through in our process together. And there's some non-negotiable things. So depending on the person's occupation or what they like to do, or like trying to get them back onto, I'm working with some of the NFL players I used to see all the time. There was a different protocol. There was a different concept there. It's if somebody's an accountant, and it's coming into tax season, it's a different process. If it's a house, if a mother, or every scenario is different, and it requires a different amount of attention. So yeah, I do take the process very seriously, and there is communication on an ongoing basis.
What I want to bring in now is, in my experience with the neurological field, like when you have a concussion or experience any kind of neurological experience, the question is, have you seen a neurologist? And for me personally, each and every time I needed to address my situation, I did go to a neurologist. As holistic and off the cuff as I am, I did go, and every single time I had gone, it was depressing. It was actually not that it wasn't helpful. It was actually the opposite, because you feel so unheard, so unseen. They had no idea. Before I came to you, I went to a neurologist in a distinguished practice, and she said, drink more water. That was the answer to all of my problems. And I was so deflated.
So let me say this: the time and a place for all discipline. There really is. And when people go to a medical neurologist and they're a little disappointed, they do certain diagnostics, they pin certain things down. And oftentimes now what I see are more chronic patients. And so when people come to me with frustrations, the last thing I want to do is start jumping on the bandwagon and knocking somebody else, because it doesn't serve anybody.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody's well-intentioned,
Yeah.
and there are some people that have life-changing experiences that probably the same doctor you went to. But for whatever reason, it wasn't a good fit for you at that time. What I appreciate about it is oftentimes they will have done certain things to rule out other things that I don't have to waste my time figuring out. So I will take an overall assessment of what they have done in the history, and then we can confirm, deny that, and then we can get on to things that can save us time. So, everybody goes on this journey in different ways. Sometimes you have to satisfy, like, for example, in the school system around here, if someone has a concussion, they have to go to certain doctors, or they don't get to play in that sport.
Yeah.
So in that more acute setting, they run that gamut. Sometimes they resolve and sometimes they don't. What I'm finding now at this point in my career is those people who are not getting the resolve, they find their way here. And again, we embrace what they've done. I cast no real opinion on it, because it's just information that we take. It's called history, and then we move on to the present and then the future. So it can be frustrating.
What I'd love to dive into is the gut brain connection, and
that is a whole podcast unto itself. But yeah, we can talk about that for sure.
Yeah, because I really want to highlight, bring in, learn from, share some information with people about, you really integrate nutrition. And as you know, my standards are really high when it comes to supplements.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, what's in it? What's in it? And I won't just take anything. I do trust what you have to say about this.
Yeah. And so, and it's not just today in nutrition. This is a really complex topic, in the sense that it's not just what's in it. It's where you're getting the supplements from. What is the real quality? So there's a lot of the nutritional industry in that regard is everything we utilize here has been it's pharmacological grade. It's quality control, it's top notch. And I try to explain to people, when you get supplements from lesser sources, oftentimes when there's mass marketing and there's mass distribution, you cannot maintain the level of quality necessary at the price point that the masses are given. So you have to take that into consideration. But just so everybody understands, almost everybody that sustains a concussion ends up with something called a leaky gut. There's like over 90% of the people that have a mild traumatic brain injury will experience a leaky gut. And when you get a leaky gut, just for a brief overview on that, the border of your intestines and your digestive tract, that becomes porous, and things start getting into your system that don't belong. That creates inflammation, and it creates an immune response, and that can become problematic. And when you get a leaky gut, you almost always get something called a leaky brain, meaning the blood-brain barrier becomes compromised, and that causes a whole nother series of issues in terms of inflammation. So, and this is a big part that I see is missed with people that are suffering from concussions. It's almost, you have to address this component.
So all of the conditions, say parasites, heavy metals, like all of the possible things that could go wrong, viruses, the weakened immune system, why is that activated sometimes with concussions?
So, oh boy. So when it comes to the human body today versus the human body 50 or 75 years ago, there's a lot more going on. We are exposed to so many more things: environmental exposures, mold exposures, off-gassing from things in our home and our clothing and so forth. So it gets really complex. And there's a lot more, there's many more things that the body has to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And that sets up a whole nother section. So when I talk about metabolic, physiologic, and microstructural, the metabolic is a big part of it. And we have to really do many times a deep dive into that. I'll ask questions about gut health and just general nutrition. And I'll get some cues real quick, and we might need to sidebar on that and really address it. So you do have to heal the gut. You have to balance out the microbiome and the bacteria in the gut. Because if you don't do that, you can never optimize your recovery. There's just no two ways about it. And that comes down to lifestyle, managing certain exposures. Some things we can't help that we're exposed to. Other things, in lifestyle, we do expose ourselves to. There's a whole list of those things. So we have to have, again, you mentioned before the coaching part of it, really is. It's about guiding people and educating to all the pieces that are necessary to address if you really want to get well. Because there are some people that aren't willing to change, and they will stay in that same cycle of inflammation, some progression back to inflammation. They'll do it over and over again, and they suffer, and then they get to a point when they're really just fed up, and then they come knocking on my door, hopefully, and we can work them through the process.
Yeah, and we're doing this so that people don't have to wait until they're fed up and knock on your
Yeah,
door.
absolutely.
Yeah. What are 5 signs, or a few signs, let's just say, that a concussion is not fully healed years later, perhaps?
First of all, it's identifying what might have happened. See, sometimes when we have a concussion, there are some things that are very obvious right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
And so, let's say, for example, you never had headaches, and now all of a sudden you have headaches. You had a concussion. You've got these headaches. It's really easy to understand pain, but there's other systems that are involved too. So, oftentimes, processing. I have a dear friend of mine who had a concussion a number of years ago. And when he had his concussion, he also coincidentally had a black mold infection.
Mm.
This was like 10 years ago, and to this day, when he reads, he's a voracious reader. He reads all the time. But to this day, he's like, I have to go through certain paragraphs 3, 4, 5 times before I can move on. It's really frustrating. So, not being able to process things. Like, there are certain things that we do right now, like having this conversation. It's flowing because our brains are working properly.
Yeah.
When your brain is concussed, or you're having residual effects of a concussion, there's an energy deficit.
Yeah.
And your brain gets tired. So when people say to me, I just can't focus, I don't have the same attention or concentration, these things are big, big, big blinking lights in my world that say this has to be addressed. Or if someone says something about their digestion, these are important. Ask most practitioners, what's the importance when you have a concussion in the gut? They're going to be like, what?
Mm.
They don't put those two things together. Nothing in our body is in isolation. And the thing I love about the nervous system is it really is the master system. It runs everything, which puts more responsibility on people like me or professionals like me to spend a lifetime looking at all these things and getting good at this. And if there's something that I'm not, super, super high level at, we have to pull somebody else in to help. And that's why it's a team approach. No one practitioner has all the answers. So we have to work in collaboration today more than ever.
I love that. I love that. The nervous system, one of the most overlooked, right, systems. There should be a class in mastering your nervous system. Where does the vagus nerve fit in all of these systems?
So when we talked about the different phenotypes, the autonomic system, that's the sympathetic, fight or flight, or the parasympathetic, which is the rest, feed, breed, and repair system, part of that nervous system. There's a balance. They're always both activated. And unfortunately, when we have brain injuries or we're stressed out in our current, lifestyles that we live today, there's too much fight or flight, too much sympathetic drive, and the parasympathetic system becomes just disproportionately shut down compared to the activity of the stressor system. And so the vagus nerve is the key nerve in the parasympathetic system, one of them, and it controls a lot of function in our organs and the systems of digestion and so forth, and cardiac. So it is a great tool. It's a big buzzword today. Everybody's vagal nerve stimulation. Again, stimulator beware, because you have to be careful in the right amount, on the right side. There's different components to what this powerful nerve does, but it's a tremendous. You and I've done a lot of vagal nerves, especially in the earlier phases of things. There were some days that's all we did was vagal nerve work. And it was, it helps to really promote a calming effect and gives that brain the ability to start to heal. It reduces the inflammation tremendously.
I think there's a lot you balance that I witnessed. And then I asked you this the other day. I'm like, was that intuitive or is that skill, experience, or knowledge? Because there's also the hands-on, whether it's the chiropractic manipulation or the cranial sacral work, or, really, it's been really cool witnessing the intuitive nature of how are you today? Like, it's not, you might have a plan, but it's how are you today? And you really work with that. And let's speak to this. Like, sometimes I'd walk in, I would be like, just touch my neck and fix it, right? Then we'll do the other things.
Well, it's interesting you bring in the hands-on part. So it's funny
Yeah.
because there's a good part of my practice. These are patients that actually have a chiropractor, and when people come to me and they have a chiropractor, I say, if you enjoy chiropractic care and you have a relationship with the chiropractor, please. I'm not looking to get in the way of that. We're looking to offer some solutions and some support and guidance in what we do. And there's so many of them. And other people come here and they're like, I don't want chiropractic. I don't want you to touch me. That's fine too. But there's different ways to do that. So to your point, is it intuition? Is it science? I don't even know anymore. It's
Yeah.
really just paying attention and getting into a healing space so that I can walk into the room or we can connect. And oftentimes I'll like, for example, I could look at you in the reception area, take a peek, and I'll pretty much know where we might be going on a given day, and then we would talk. So it's really being open to seeing what a patient brings in each and every time you see them. And you can have a plan, but you can't lock into assumptions too hard. You have to be flexible with this.
Yeah. So given the, I don't want to use the lack word, but there's a sparse number of practitioners who are really choosing to specialize in. I mean, I know that you do a lot of other work as well. It's not just concussions. There's places few and far between. It might be out of state from somewhere or someone, in another country. I know I traveled. I know people travel around, like, to go and find the support they need for concussions. Because it's a life altering journey. And like, where do you see your work going, considering that I know that your passion and desire to help a lot of people?
So we're building out our team here. We do a number of different things. So we do the functional neurology. We have some chiropractic. We do a lot of neuropathy. We do neurofeedback. We do brain mapping and neurofeedback work here too. That's one of our technological tools that I love to work with. Brain mapping somebody and correlating that to what we see in other neurological findings in the exam. Again, it puts together a complete practice. But where are we going? I'm really looking to be more far-reaching. So, for example, when we're done with this podcast, somebody's coming in from upstate New York. They're traveling a bunch of hours to come down here to start an intensive. 2 weeks ago, I was actually working with somebody that used to be a team member here in my office. She moved to Colorado. She had an injury and she had something called chronic regional pain syndrome. So we did it over the phone. So you can do a lot of this from afar as well. So there's different ways we can, through technology and evaluation, we can actually help people, and they don't always have to be right here. I mean, it's always obviously gives us an advantage to do certain things here that we can't do elsewhere. But I see it growing and becoming more of a far-reaching process because, quite honestly, the amount of energy that it takes to play at a high level in neurology and functional neurology and functional medicine and all the things that we're learning and with the amount of new things that we're learning, I call it an obsession. Man, I love doing this. I love my family too, but everybody understands who I am. This is something that requires a lot. So I see it becoming in office. I see doing more far-reaching aspects of this as well. Technology's making that more of a possibility. There's so many technological things that the use of technology makes it easier to really get a good assessment and treat people from a distance as well. So it's kind of a cool thing.
It is really amazing because, like, I have a few cool pieces of technology at my house that, I use, though I've learned also sometimes, that you could overdo it and really without knowing what you like, somebody who's steeping their entire life and profession in this path. It is, yeah.
And by the way, and this is just being honest and transparent.
Yeah.
we always want to take it here. We want to just get right under that threshold, but sometimes we go past it because there's no meter. There's
Right.
what you say, what I see, and we work together. And how many times did we do something and it was great, and do something that, what, we tweaked it? It's a constant refinement, which is why, the phone calls and the texts in between and so forth, so that
Mhm.
we can really see. I want to know on Monday, if you're coming in on Tuesday, where I really need to be thinking, where I need to be going. We don't have to have long conversations, but what's going on, how you feeling? You communicate back, and it helps me save time and meet you in a better place more accurately each time you're in the office, which is, like I say, I use the word guiding
Yeah,
because that's what it really is. It's, we're coaching and guiding, and we're trying to optimize your neurological function, your adaptive physiology. We're trying to pull all that together so that you can be the best version of you possible.
I love this. I love this because it's, the new evolution of wellness and well-being is partnering with your support, with your team. And in my work, I'm a guide, I'm a coach, and for the coaches, consultants out there, the service practitioners, anyone in the supportive industries, it's to not approach your well-being in your physical body, your sacred vessel, the same, and having that kind of relationship with the person who's, really guiding you towards wellness. That's part of the sick care system. And so I really appreciate your work, Dr. Brian Shannon. I am
Thank
so
you.
grateful. Yeah, and I want
It's an
everybody
absolute
to.
honor. I mean, it's a pleasure. I'm grateful that you started a conversation back in January. It was, or maybe it was December, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I was what not to have been doing forward bends at that point in the journey in hot yoga
Everything,
class.
I believe everything happens for a reason. And I can't tell you how many times that, I think about that, because
Yeah,
we were around each other for a long time. I had no idea, because, and again, going back to the misconception of concussion, you're very healthy looking, your practice is amazing, and who would know that you're struggling? And unless we hadn't had that, that short conversation in the parking lot that day, you know, I don't, who knows where you'd be now?
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that conversation, I was acting, right? And what we do, we normalized, like it becomes normal. And you said that to me, you reminded me and reflected that this isn't normal. Like I've been normalizing how hard it is to focus or how challenging it is to feel coherent. And, last year I was doing some podcast episodes and I was stuttering and I really, it was so hard to keep on track. And people were like, oh, I didn't even realize it. I was like, that was so much work just to be normal. And that was after a year of sort of not working with you, navigating and being on a healing path. The where it ended up after like 9 months, I was still cognitively not in the best place. And that's when I was like, okay, I guess this is it. And then we started and
That,
it's
yeah,
amazing.
that internal suffering is really what gets me. Like, I always wonder
Yeah.
how many people are walking around today suffering, and there's hope. We don't know unless we look. And so I really hope that if somebody ever is watching this or watches this in the future, that they understand that there are resources out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can't fix everybody, but at the end of the day, there's just so many people that have come here that have been like, I've done it all. And I said, well, maybe let's see what we see, and we go through the process.
Yeah. And because hope is not a strategy, I would say there are strategies, more than hope, there are strategies. And so where can people find you and how can they engage your help?
Well, I'm in Northern New Jersey. My practice is total body rehabilitation. We're in Wyckoff, New Jersey. And you can call the office. NJ Total Wellness is our website. You can get our information off of there. Yeah,
We'll,
we're here.
we'll drop your links
Okay.
in the show notes and yeah, where people can find you and more information. And is there
Awesome.
anything like any last nugget that not only for those who might be dealing with concussions, but also for people who, their family members, like this is one of the hardest things I'd say is
Oof.
I like to speak in positive. So one of the opportunities is how do we, because you don't look unwell, right? People don't know. like you said, how challenging that gets to be, because then people don't really understand. No, I can't come. I'm not feeling you're it's not as understandable as, say, other known physical issues. So yeah, can you speak to that a little bit?
There was a couple of questions I thought I just picked up on. So what was the question you wanted me to hone in on?
I mean, just speaking to that concept of, how can people, here's a question, how can people approach that when they're in the experience, or what would you say to their supporters, like their family
Okay.
members or
So
something,
so
right?
and this is an interesting subject, because when people want to come to the office to see if we can help them, I always try to get some information. We always start with a phone consultation. I don't even charge for it. It's just I need to figure out where that person is. If there is a significant other, a spouse, or a family member that helps them with their healthcare in any way, shape, or form, um, I encourage them to bring that individual or individuals with them. Now, sometimes we have supportive family members, and sometimes they're not so supportive. So it's an individual. But the bottom line is this: when I do a history, and then I do a functional neurological exam on somebody,
Mhm.
it is a great opportunity for that person to be educated. You can remember when we first did this with you, educate them on the nuances of what you're normalizing and you're
Yeah,
just fighting with and accepting. I can point those out to you. And it's also an opportunity for the person sitting in the corner watching the examination, if that's okay with the person, with the
yeah,
with the patient, they can I can show that spouse or that significant other, they're not crazy, they're
yeah,
struggling. And I see this with men and women, husbands and wives all the time, both sides, doesn't matter. It's an exhausting thing for supporters and family members to have to deal with people when they're not functioning, because it's not that broken leg that we can throw the x-ray up and say, see, there it is.
yeah.
They start thinking that, well, maybe they're off, or they're just depressed, or we come up with all these other diagnoses, and it causes a lot of strain on relationships. So I always look forward to the opportunity to getting real with the couple, or the family member. And it's a time to educate too. So we can diagnose, we can get into the weeds of what's wrong, and we can also show people what's up. And I can't tell you how many times I've had a spouse sitting in the corner, whether it's a husband or a wife, and I can see the look on their face, like, and sometimes they break down and they start to get into tears because they're like, I didn't understand. So
Yeah,
part of my job is to help people understand what's going on. It's so important, because in today's healthcare system, what are we doing? It's a checklist. You're running through these, and it's like one, two, three. This is not how you deal with concussions. You really
yeah.
have to be able to go through a step-by-step process, and make sure it's a good match, and make sure everybody understands, because it is a team approach, especially with the family. It's a great point that you bring up.
Mm. And I'd love for anyone listening who doesn't have a concussion to also keep in mind that, your coworkers, any people around, if anyone says, yeah, I had a concussion, like, it is, oh, I thought that I've had people say, you had it was like a week ago. Like, I thought that lasted a week. It's been 6 months. Like,
Yeah.
so people make assumptions, and never make assumptions. And I think it's really a an interesting place, because there's a fear of people making judgments about you, like your
Mhm.
capacity to work, or can you hold the space, or whatever. So you got to game face it, and normalize almost. And so I would love for there to be a little bit more compassion. It is a disability of sorts. It is,
Oh,
and it's not accepted as one.
And
Um,
and let me just say this: the main algorithm, because in functional neurology today, years ago, it was just chiropractors. Now there's medical doctors, there's
mhm,
other osteopaths and so forth. So I find myself collaborating with different, PTs sometimes, for sure. And one other thing too that we didn't touch upon that I think is super important:
yeah,
everybody should get screened. I mean, it makes perfect sense before you have a concussion, or before you start your journey into Alzheimer's. Like, what's your baseline? We get our teeth checked, we get our heart checked, we get our blood pressure, our cholesterol, our vitamin D. We get all these things checked in the
yeah,
same. There's a way in our office that we can do a very comprehensive cognitive test and neurological workup that, is something that, if anybody really cares about their health, whether you're 10, 50, it doesn't matter. It's great to get a baseline so
Yeah.
that if there's a problem and you're not aware of it, you can address it.
Mm.
And if you start to have a problem in some regard, you have a baseline. And there's a very detailed way we do that. And that's exciting. And that's one of the things you asked before, where do I see it going? I
Mm.
definitely see getting more people, I don't want to say screened, it's an evaluation, and finding out where they are so that you have a reference, going
Mhm.
forward. That's super important.
I love that. I love that. We go for our blood tests and all of our tests, and neurology and our cognition is
We don't deal with the brain until we're losing it.
Oh, wow.
In
Yeah,
the first 20 years, we're denying it. So, anyway, yeah, it's important.
I love that. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day and sharing
Thank
this
you
with us.
thank you for
Yeah.
having me. It's been a pleasure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so we will be posting in the show notes, everybody. And I really encourage check out njtotalwellness.com. Learn more about Dr. Brian Shannon's work. And if you have any questions, you want to reach out to me, you know where to find me. And thank you for being here. Please engage with us on social media. Find us at YouTube, comment, share, give us a thumbs up. You know that your support means the world to me and it helps us grow and sustain this podcast.